The morning flight from Dubai to Istanbul was supposed to be calm, and that was exactly what the passengers expected when they boarded the aircraft. People moved through the aisle with sleepy faces, placing bags in overhead bins, adjusting their seats, and settling in for the 5-hour journey. No one noticed the quiet man sitting in seat 14A, looking out the window without blinking. He had flown many times before, yet today felt different, though he could not explain why. Something in the air felt heavier, as if the aircraft carried a story hidden from everyone else on board. Far ahead, the flight crew was busy preparing the cockpit. The captain, a senior pilot with decades of experience, checked the controls while the first officer reviewed the route. Everything looked normal. Weather was clear. Systems were stable. The aircraft was fully ready for takeoff. But what no one knew was that this flight would soon be remembered as one of the strangest moments of the captain's long career. Among the passengers was a woman in her mid-30s who sat quietly in seat 22F. She kept her eyes on the floor most of the time, avoiding attention. She wore simple clothes and carried only a small bag. Her face looked tired, as if she had lived through something no one else in the cabin could imagine. People around her barely noticed her presence. She did not speak, did not ask for help, and did not show any sign that she had been through something extraordinary. Yet, if anyone had looked closely, they might have sensed she was carrying a truth too heavy for normal life. The aircraft took off on schedule, rising smoothly above the clouds. Passengers relaxed. Some watched movies, others read books, and a few slept with headphones on. Cabin lights dimmed slightly as breakfast service began. Everything seemed normal, until something unusual happened inside the cockpit. The captain had been feeling light pressure in his chest for the last 10 minutes, but he ignored it, thinking it was stress. He continued to speak to air traffic control, adjusting altitude and giving standard reports. But suddenly, he stopped speaking. His breathing grew shallow. He leaned forward for a moment, as if trying to steady himself. The first officer noticed and asked if he was okay, but before he could finish the sentence, the captain collapsed sideways in his seat. The first officer froze for 2 seconds, shocked by the suddenness of it. He unbuckled his straps and tried to wake the captain, calling out to him, but the captain did not respond. The first officer immediately picked up the intercom and called the cabin crew, asking them to come forward urgently. His voice shook slightly, but he tried to stay calm. Panic was the last thing the passengers could be allowed to feel. As 2 flight attendants rushed toward the cockpit, the flight became strangely quiet. Passengers sensed that something was wrong, even though no announcement had been made yet. Energy shifted in the cabin, as if the air itself had changed. The woman in seat 22F slowly lifted her head, listening carefully. For the first time since boarding, she looked alert. Her eyes focused on the closed cockpit door, and something inside her seemed to awaken. The flight attendants reached the cockpit and saw the captain unconscious. The first officer explained rapidly that he needed help and that he might need to call for any medically trained passenger. But before he could finish speaking, the woman in 22F stood up. No one noticed her at first. She walked calmly toward the front, moving with a quiet confidence that did not match her simple appearance. The passengers seated nearby watched her pass, but said nothing. Some thought she was going to the restroom. Others assumed she was stretching her legs. No one could imagine the truth. The first officer opened the cockpit door again to let the cabin crew step inside. And at that exact second, the woman reached the front of the aircraft. The flight attendants began turning around to tell her she could not be here, but she stepped past them gently, her eyes fixed only on the pilot's seat. The first officer looked up in confusion. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," he said, but his words stopped when she spoke softly. "I know how to help," she said. Her voice was steady, calm, and strangely familiar. Though he could not place why, one of the flight attendants tried to ask who she was. But before anyone could finish a question, the first officer looked at the woman more closely. Something about her face felt shocking, impossible even. He had seen that face somewhere before 5 years ago, in an aviation safety bulletin, beside a headline that almost every pilot in the region had read. A headline that declared she had died in a rescue mission, but she was standing right here, alive inside the cockpit. And she moved toward the unconscious captain with a certainty that made everyone freeze in place, unsure whether they were witnessing reality or something beyond explanation. The cockpit was silent except for the steady beeping of the instruments. The first officer stood frozen, staring at the woman who should not have existed. He remembered the report clearly. A helicopter crash in a remote area. No survivors recovered. Her body never found. Yet officials later declared her dead after months of searching. Every pilot in the region had heard the story. It was the kind that stayed with you because her final radio call had been calm, brave, almost comforting to the rescue team. She was guiding away from danger, but now she was here, alive. The woman knelt beside the unconscious captain without waiting for permission. She checked his pulse, his breathing, and the color of his skin. Her hands moved confidently, as if she had done this many times before. The first officer watched her, unable to speak. He did not understand how someone lost for years could suddenly appear on his flight at the exact moment he needed help. Passengers in the front rows noticed the disturbance and began whispering. A flight attendant tried to keep them calm, smiling politely even though fear was rising inside her. She whispered instructions to another crew member to prepare for a medical announcement. But before she could step away, the woman inside the cockpit spoke again. "He isn't in danger yet," she said softly. "But we need to keep him stable." The first officer blinked. "How do you know that?" She looked at him for a moment. Her eyes carried a depth that made him feel as if she had lived a lifetime in silence. "Because I've been in a cockpit during far worse," she answered. Her tone was not proud. It was quiet, almost tired, like someone who had survived something heavy and never talked about it again. While she worked, the first officer contacted ground control to report a medical emergency. He tried his best to keep his voice steady. "Captain unresponsive. Requesting emergency vectors and medical guidance." But the moment he finished speaking, another shock came from behind. A passenger had walked forward, confused by the silence and crew movement. He saw the woman's face clearly. His breath caught in his chest. He stepped back, gripping a seat for balance, as if he had seen a ghost. He whispered loudly to another nearby passenger, "That can't be her. She's gone. She can't be alive." The whispers spread. People who had not even seen her yet turned around, trying to understand what was happening. The cabin crew quickly stepped in, moving the man back to his seat and reassuring everyone that everything was under control. But passengers rarely stayed calm when they sensed hidden truth. And there was something undeniably strange about this moment. Inside the cockpit, the woman gently adjusted the captain's position so he could breathe more easily. She checked his hand, noticing a slight tremor that others had missed. "He was dehydrated," she said quietly. "Maybe low blood pressure too." The first officer frowned. "You talk like someone trained in this." She gave a faint nod. "I used to handle emergencies for a living." Before he could ask more, the captain's breathing improved slightly. The woman watched him closely, then looked at the first officer with a seriousness that carried weight. "You must fly the aircraft. Focus on the route. Let me handle him." He wanted to ask who she really was, where she had been all these years, why she appeared now, but the aircraft needed him more than his curiosity did. He turned back to the controls, hands trembling slightly. The responsibility of handling the aircraft alone was already heavy, but carrying the unanswered questions felt even heavier. Only when he stabilized altitude again did he dare to speak. "If you're really who I think you are, how did you survive that day?" She looked toward the cockpit window. Outside, clouds drifted like soft walls surrounding them. Her expression changed, not pain, not fear, but something deeper, as if remembering a chapter she had tried to close forever. "No one believed I could make it out," she said quietly. "And maybe I wasn't supposed to. But sometimes life gives you a path you never asked for." The first officer swallowed hard. Her words felt like pieces of a much larger story. A story the world never heard. In the cabin, the whispers grew stronger. People leaned into the aisle, trying to catch a glimpse of the mysterious woman. Some passengers had begun searching her appearance online, remembering fragments of her old news reports. "Missing pilot," someone whispered. "Rescue mission hero," another person murmured. "But she died years ago." Didn't she? Back in the cockpit, the aircraft suddenly hit a mild turbulence wave. The first officer reached for the controls instinctively. The woman steadied herself with one hand on the cockpit wall. The first officer exhaled with relief when the aircraft leveled again. "If passengers see you," he said slowly, "they will panic." She shook her head. "Not if I stay here." "But why here?" he asked quietly. "Why this flight? Why this moment?" She lifted her eyes and met his again. There was something haunting yet peaceful in her gaze, as if she carried truth but did not wish to burden anyone with it. "Because sometimes," she whispered, "life brings you exactly where you're needed, even if you don't want to be found." Before he could respond, the intercom buzzed again, a new message from ground control. The airport wanted to speak to the crew urgently. And the moment the first officer answered, the tone of the controller revealed something unexpected. They already knew someone unusual was on board, and they wanted to confirm if it was really her. The first officer held the radio close, listening carefully as ground control repeated the request. Their tone was calm, but he sensed the tension beneath every word. Controllers never asked such questions unless something unusual, something extraordinary was unfolding. "Confirm," the voice said. "Is there a second pilot in the cockpit?" "We received information." The first officer's eyes shifted toward the woman. She was checking the captain's breathing again, unaware that the world beyond this aircraft might have suddenly rediscovered her existence. He hesitated before answering. "There is someone assisting," he said carefully. A long pause came from the radio. "We need clarification. Is the assisting individual female, around mid-30s, short hair, wearing a gray jacket?" The first officer swallowed. The description was perfect. He gave no direct answer. "Why do you ask?" Another pause. Then a softer voice came through, one that seemed to choose every word with care. "Because if it's the person we think, she was reported deceased 5 years ago." He ended the call for a moment, unable to continue. His hands shook so much he had to place the radio down. The woman finally looked up. What did they say? He did not know how to tell her without sounding frightened. "They asked if the person helping me matches your description." Her eyes softened in a way he did not expect. Not fear, not shock. Something more like sadness. A sadness that had been waiting quietly for years. The first officer spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "They think you're dead." She looked toward the cockpit window again, watching the clouds moving like a calm sea. She took a slow breath before answering. "I know." 2 simple words, but they carried the weight of 5 silent years. Before either of them could speak again, the cabin crew knocked lightly on the cockpit door. When the first officer opened it, the senior attendant leaned inside, her face strained with worry. "Passengers are asking questions," she whispered. "Some say they recognize her. They're searching old news reports. They're getting anxious." He glanced at the woman. She remained still, almost peaceful, as if none of this noise could reach her. The flight attendant tried to lower her voice even further. Some passengers think she's a ghost." The first officer rubbed his forehead. The situation was spreading too fast. He needed a plan. But before he could give any instruction, the woman stood up slowly and met the flight attendant's eyes. "Please tell them the captain is stable," she said gently. "Tell them everything is under control, and don't mention me." The attendant hesitated. "They already know someone is up here." "It's better than letting fear grow," the woman replied softly. Back in the cabin, people whispered in all directions. A man in row 10 held his phone with an old news article opened. He whispered to the woman next to him, "This is her. Look at the photo. It's the same person." "But that's impossible," she replied. "Nobody survives a crash like that." Another passenger said, "If she was alive, why would she hide? Why show up now?" Questions piled up faster than answers. Meanwhile, inside the cockpit, the first officer tried to focus on the instruments again, but confusion filled his mind. He finally asked her the question he had been avoiding. "Why didn't you tell the world you survived?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the unconscious captain, checking his pulse again. Only after she was sure nothing had changed did she speak. "Sometimes surviving is not the same as living," she whispered. "I walked away from the wreck, yes, but everything else stayed behind." The first officer sensed she had lived through a story far deeper than anyone imagined. Something so painful or complex that silence seemed easier than truth. "But now," he said quietly, "everyone will know." Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. There was no fear in them, only acceptance. "Maybe it's time." Just then, the aircraft jolted again, another wave of unexpected turbulence, this time stronger. The first officer tightened his grip on the controls. The woman steadied the captain's arms so he would not fall. "What's causing this?" she asked. "Wind shear," the first officer muttered. "Stronger than forecasted." He adjusted altitude, trying to find smoother air, but the turbulence persisted. The cabin chime sounded, warning the crew to stay seated. Passengers gasped as overhead bins rattled. The flight attendant called again from the door. "People are scared," she said. "They think something is connected her, the turbulence, the emergency." The woman stepped forward, speaking calmly. "Tell them turbulence is normal, and tell them I'm just assisting the captain. Nothing more." "But who do I say you are?" the attendant asked. The woman paused. Her expression held years of untold stories. Finally she said, "Tell them I'm someone who knows how to stay calm when skies get rough." The attendant nodded and left. As the turbulence slowly eased, the woman leaned closer to the first officer, her voice low. "You didn't answer ground control," she said. "They will keep asking. They need to know who's on this flight. And I think they're preparing for something." The first officer looked at her, fear and curiosity mixing in his chest. What could they possibly prepare for? She looked straight ahead, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "For the truth," she whispered. Before either of them spoke again, the radio buzzed a second time. Ground control wasn't asking anymore. They were demanding confirmation, and they were sending someone to meet the aircraft the moment it landed. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, as if the signal carried more urgency than before. The first officer reached for it with a stiff hand, bracing himself for whatever message was coming. Before he could speak, the controller's voice came through calmer than before, but carrying an edge that made the air inside the cockpit feel colder. "Flight 782, we need confirmation. Is the individual assisting you a woman who resembles the pilot reported missing 5 years ago? We must verify for security and medical protocol." The first officer kept his eyes on the controls, avoiding the woman's gaze because he knew she was listening closely. He pressed the button, but instead of answering, he simply said, "Stand by." He placed the radio down slowly. The cockpit felt smaller now, as if the sky outside had closed in around them. She watched him quietly, waiting. "They won't stop," he said. "I didn't expect them to," she replied. He turned to her. "If I confirm who they think you are, your life changes the moment this plane lands. Reporters, investigators, officials, everyone will come. Are you ready for that?" Her expression did not change. She looked tired, but not defeated. "I didn't come here to hide." Those words sat between them like a truth long buried, and now rising back into the light dot in the cabin, fear spread even faster. The turbulence had calmed, but the whispers had not. Passengers leaned out of their seats, asking questions the crew could not answer. One person insisted he recognized her voice from an old radio recording. Another claimed he saw her photo in a memorial video years ago. A mother hugged her small child tightly, unsure what was happening but sensing that this flight was no longer ordinary. The atmosphere shifted, curiosity mixed with fear, disbelief mixed with hope. Back in the cockpit, the first officer faced a new problem. The captain's condition was stable but unchanged. His breathing remained steady, but he did not wake. The woman stood beside him, checking his temperature, adjusting his seat, doing whatever she could without medical equipment. "You've done this before," the first officer said softly. She nodded. "When you fly rescue missions, you learn to take care of the injured until help arrives." The way she spoke about her past calmly, without pride, made him feel something heavier than curiosity, respect, and something else. A quiet sadness. Knowing she had lived through something life-altering and had hidden from the world afterward. "Tell me what happened that day," he said. "The truth, not the news version." Her hands paused for a moment. She lowered her eyes. "The news said the aircraft went down because of engine fire," she said. "But that wasn't the whole story. We knew the fire wouldn't last long. We had a chance to land. But there was something else, something we caught too late. A structural failure." She took a breath, remembering. "When we hit the ground, part of the cabin collapsed inward. I was trapped but conscious. The others were not." The first officer felt a chill run through him. Her voice did not shake, but he sensed pain woven beneath every word. "I climbed out," she continued. "But the rescue team never found me. The place where I landed was hidden by the wreckage. The fire made the search impossible." He frowned. "Then how did you survive? For days? Weeks?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at her hands, as if they still carried memories of how she survived. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at her hands, as if they still carried memories of how she survived. "I walked," she said softly. "And when I reached a village, I told them my name, but the world had already declared me gone. And sometimes, disappearing feels easier than returning." The first officer absorbed her words. The mystery of her survival was finally taking shape, but something still felt missing. Something unspoken. Before he could ask more, the aircraft experienced a slight tilt. Nothing dangerous, but enough to bring his attention back to the instruments. He adjusted the controls quickly. She stepped closer. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," he said. "Just adjusting our approach path." Her eyes narrowed. Slightly, not in suspicion, but in awareness. "They're guiding you differently, aren't they?" He hesitated. Ground control had indeed changed their instructions earlier. A longer path. A specific runway. More coordination. All signs that security or emergency teams were preparing for something unusual. "They want us isolated," he admitted. "They don't want anyone near the aircraft until they confirm who you are." Her voice softened. "I understand." A knock at the cockpit door interrupted them again. The senior flight attendant stepped inside, her face pale. "We have a problem," she whispered. "Several passengers are refusing to sit. They want to know who she is. Some are crying. They think something dangerous is happening." The woman stepped forward gently. "Let me talk to them." The first officer shook his head. "You can't, not yet." But the attendant looked conflicted. "If she doesn't, they'll panic. They already think the flight is in danger because the pilot passed out." The woman took a breath and placed a steady hand on the seat in front of her, grounding herself. "I will not frighten them," she said softly. "I just want them to feel safe." The first officer stared at her, torn between protocol and instinct. "You step out there," he warned, "and the entire cabin will know who you are." Her eyes met his. "Maybe," she whispered. "That's exactly what's supposed to happen." She reached for the cockpit door handle, and the moment she opened it, every passenger who had been waiting, whispering, fearing, fell silent at once. When the cockpit door slid open, the entire cabin fell into a strange, heavy silence. Every whisper stopped mid-sentence. People who had been standing froze, holding the backs of seats. Even the hum of the engines felt quieter, as if the aircraft itself sensed the moment. She stepped out slowly, her posture calm, her eyes gentle. She looked nothing like the dramatic pictures passengers had seen in news reports years ago. Those images showed a confident rescue pilot in uniform, smiling proudly. But now she stood barefoot from removing her shoes to help the captain, wearing a simple gray jacket, hair shorter than before, face carrying the weight of lost time. The passengers didn't know whether to feel fear or hope. A man in row 9 took a small step forward. "It's really you," he whispered, voice trembling. "I watched your memorial. How can you be here?" The woman didn't answer quickly. She looked around the entire cabin, taking in every face: worried parents, confused teenagers, elderly travelers gripping armrests. She saw fear, curiosity, disbelief, and something else too, a kind of longing. The way people look at someone who survived something they never could have. "I am here because the captain needed help," she said softly. "And I was close enough to give it." The man shook his head. "But you were declared dead." A young girl sitting beside the window whispered, loud enough for a few to hear, "She came back to save us." Some passengers gasped, others covered their mouths. A flight attendant tried to calm them, but the woman raised her hand gently to stop her. Her calmness felt stronger than any announcement. "I didn't come back for attention," she continued. "I didn't even expect anyone to recognize me. I was just traveling like you, quietly, alone." A woman in the front row spoke up, voice cracking. "Where were you all these years?" The question hit the cabin like a soft wave. Everyone leaned in, desperate for the story hidden behind her eyes. She took a breath. "I survived the crash, but I wasn't the same afterward. I needed time away from the noise, away from the world, away from the story everyone believed." The passengers listened as she explained, not in detail, but in a way that brought them closer. "I lived quietly. In a small place, I told no one who I was. Some days felt long. Some days felt impossible. But life kept moving, even when I didn't." "Ugh." Man near the aisle whispered, "Why return now?" She answered without looking at him, "I didn't plan it. Sometimes life brings you where you are needed, and today, I was needed." People absorbed her words. Their fear slowly faded into something more complex: respect, awe, maybe even gratitude. The flight attendants watched her carefully. They had never seen a plane full of strangers grow quiet like this, as if listening to someone who walked out of a story. Then a new sound broke the silence. The seatbelt sign chiming again. The aircraft entered a patch of light turbulence, but this time the passengers didn't scream or panic. Instead, they watched her. Somehow her presence made the shaking feel less frightening. The first officer stepped out of the cockpit, just far enough to address the cabin. "Everyone, please stay seated. The captain is stable. We are diverting for medical support, but the aircraft is safe." Passengers nodded. They believed him, not because of his words, but because of her calmness behind him. He looked at her, silently asking if she was ready to return to the cockpit. She gave a small nod, but before she turned, an older man in row 7 raised his hand. Slightly. "May I ask one thing?" She paused. "Yes." "When you survived," he hesitated, "did you ever wish you hadn't? I mean, carrying something so heavy, alone?" Her eyes softened. She wasn't offended. The question came from someone who understood loss too well. "I wished for many things," she said quietly. "But today, when the captain needed help, I didn't wish for anything else. I just acted. Maybe that means I was meant to still be here." The man nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. A gentle warmth spread through the cabin, different from fear or excitement. Something healing, something human. Passengers watched her walk back to the cockpit, her steps steady, as if she were returning to a place she once belonged. When the door closed behind her, the whispers changed. They were no longer fearful. They were hopeful. Back inside, the first officer took his seat again and adjusted the controls. "They're preparing emergency personnel on the ground," he told her. "They're waiting for you too." She sat beside the captain, checking his pulse again. "I know. What will you tell them?" he asked. She looked at him, her expression calm but unreadable. "The truth, but not all at once," he exhaled slowly. She wasn't running anymore. Whatever she had carried for 5 years, she was finally facing it. Outside, clouds parted as the aircraft began its descent. The sunlight touched the wings, making them shine like polished silver. She looked at the sky ahead, something gentle shifting in her expression. Not fear. Not sadness, not acceptance. The first officer watched her quietly, a strange thought crossing his mind. This woman, lost to the world, had returned not with noise or drama, but with calmness strong enough to steady an entire aircraft of fearful strangers. And now the ground waited. Authorities waited. Answers waited. But something else waited too. The moment when she would finally step off this aircraft and step back into a world that had already said goodbye to her once. Descent began gradually, the aircraft lowering through soft layers of cloud that glowed orange under the afternoon sun. The passengers felt the gentle angle shift, and a ripple of nervous energy moved through the cabin. People tightened their seatbelts, held hands, whispered short prayers, or simply stared at the seatback in front of them. They knew something waited on the ground, something bigger than a normal medical diversion. Something connected to the quiet woman now sitting inside the cockpit. The first officer monitored the instruments carefully. His heart beat fast, but his hands were steady. He had flown challenging approaches before, but this one carried a weight no manual or checklist could prepare him for. Behind him, she sat beside the captain, helping him breathe steadily by keeping his posture correct. Every now and then, she watched the horizon with a calm focus that did not belong to someone returning from 5 silent years. She looked like someone who had never left the sky at all. "Medical team is on standby," the first officer said softly. "And security is also waiting." She gave a faint smile, though not a happy one. "Of course they are." He hesitated before asking, "Are you afraid?" Her eyes stayed on the view outside, not in the way people expect. "I'm not afraid of questions. I'm afraid of answers I still don't know how to explain." The first officer nodded. He didn't push further. The cockpit was filled with a quiet strength, the kind that comes from someone who endured something alone and was still learning how to speak about it. A message from the cabin crew interrupted the calm. "Passengers want to know what will happen when we land," the attendant said through the intercom. "They're asking if authorities will board the plane. They're worried." The woman leaned forward. "Tell them the truth. That medical help will come first, and that everything else will be handled with care. They deserve honesty." The attendant paused. "And what should we say about you?" The woman looked at the first officer, then back at the intercom button. Tell them I'm someone who survived a long time ago, and today, life found me again." The attendant said nothing for a moment, then answered softly, "Understood." As the aircraft descended below the cloud layer, the airport came into view. Long runways, flashing vehicles, and a formation of emergency trucks positioned near the landing zone. There were more vehicles than usual. Cameras were positioned far from the runway, kept behind barriers. The world was waiting, whether she liked it or not. Passengers who saw the view outside began whispering again. Why so many ambulances? Is this for the captain or for her? Is she really the pilot everyone thought was gone? What will they do to her? Some passengers looked scared. Others looked curious. A few looked inspired, like they were witnessing history. Inside the cockpit, the first officer made final checks. "We're cleared for landing." She looked at him with a steady gaze. "You'll do well. You speak like someone who's landed planes in worse situations," he said. Her quiet smile returned. "I have." The aircraft glided lower, the runway expanding beneath them. The engines hummed deep and steady. The passengers braced. The cabin lights brightened slightly as the machine aligned perfectly with the center line. The wheels touched the ground with a soft thump. Smooth, controlled, confident. The passengers burst into relieved applause, but the first officer barely heard them. He was already steering the aircraft toward the designated emergency area. As instructed, fire trucks and airport medical teams waited in a perfect formation, engines running, lights flashing. The sight alone made the landing feel heavier, more serious. As the aircraft slowed to a stop, the first officer turned to her. "They'll board in less than a minute." She nodded once. "Before they come, I want to tell you something." He waited, sensing the weight of her words. 5 years ago, she said quietly, "the world believed I didn't make it. But the truth is, I didn't come back because I didn't know how to be myself again. I thought disappearing was the only way to survive." He listened closely, still holding the controls. "But today," she continued, "when the captain collapsed, I realized something. I am still meant to help. That part of me never died, and maybe this is the first moment in 5 years that feels real." Her words hit him deeper than he expected. He understood now. It wasn't fear of the world that kept her away. It was fear of not belonging to it anymore. Before he could respond, a knock echoed through the cockpit door. "Medical team is boarding," the attendant announced. The woman took one last look at the unconscious captain, gently brushing a hand across his arm, and then she stood. "Whatever happens next," she whispered, "I'm ready." When she opened the cockpit door, the passengers stared at her again, but their expressions were different this time. Some looked grateful, others emotional. A few even looked proud. She stepped into the cabin just as the door opened from the outside. A team of medics rushed in, and directly behind them, airport officials who had seen her photo for years. One of them froze mid-step when he recognized her. She stood silently, waiting, not hiding, not shrinking, not running. For the first time in 5 years, she faced the world. The medical team moved quickly through the aisle, heading straight for the cockpit. Passengers stepped aside, creating a clear path. Some placed hands over their hearts as she walked with them, not as a ghost from a tragic story, but as someone alive, solid, real, breathing. Rumors and whispers dissolved into something quieter, something almost respectful. She paused near row 6 as the medics passed her. A woman sitting by the window reached out gently. "You saved the captain, and all of us," she whispered. Her eyes were full of tears. She didn't try to hide. The woman nodded softly. Anyone would have done the same. But the passenger shook her head. "No, not anyone. You did." The words touched her more deeply than she expected. She had spent 5 years believing she would never be anything more than a memory forgotten by the world. But here she was seen again, not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a living person who still mattered. When she reached the front of the aircraft, 2 airport officials stood waiting. They held formal badges but lowered them respectfully when they saw her approach. Their expressions carried shock, relief, disbelief, all mixing in ways they couldn't hide. One of them spoke quietly. "We have been searching for answers about you for years." She gave a calm nod. "I know." He stepped forward carefully, like someone approaching a fragile truth. "We prepared for medical help. Security was only because we couldn't believe the reports coming from the passengers. We never expected to see you walk out of that cockpit." Her voice stayed steady. "I understand." The second official swallowed hard. "Is it really you? Can you confirm your identity?" She looked at both of them, then at the passengers behind her. For a moment she felt the weight of 5 silent years pressing against her chest. She had run from questions, from headlines, from the image of who she used to be. She had lived in a quiet place where no one knew her, where she didn't have to explain why she survived when others didn't. But today, that life had ended the moment she stepped into the cockpit. So she lifted her chin and spoke with calm certainty. "Yes," she said. "It's me." For a moment, no one moved, not the officials, not the passengers, not even the medics coming out of the cockpit with news that the captain was stable. The world seemed to pause, recognizing the moment as something rare. Then, the official exhaled, slowly, as if releasing 5 years of unanswered questions. "Welcome back," he whispered. The words broke something inside her, not pain, but a quiet release. A small smile touched her lips, the kind that appears after years of holding everything in. The medic stepped forward. One of them approached her. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical support?" She shook her head. "No, I'm fine." But the medic saw something in her eyes, tiredness, not from injury, but from carrying a story too long on her own. He didn't push. He simply nodded. Passengers began to gather their belongings as the door opened wider. The warm breeze from the runway rushed into the cabin. Outside, dozens of people stood behind a barrier. Officials, reporters, airport staff, all watching the aircraft with a mixture of confusion and awe. No one knew exactly what to expect. The first officer stepped out of the cockpit at last, joining her near the exit. His uniform was wrinkled, his face tired, but his eyes held something new, a quiet respect, even gratitude. "You were extraordinary today," he said. She met his gaze. "You kept everyone safe." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but you reminded them not to be afraid." She didn't answer, but her expression softened. She wasn't used to praise anymore. As she stepped forward to exit the aircraft, passengers applauded, not loudly, not in celebration, but softly, like a welcome back, like a recognition of resilience, like a quiet thank you to someone who had given them calm when they needed it most. A child waved at her. A teenager nodded in admiration. A man held his hand over his heart, silently honoring her. Each person saw a different meaning in her return, but all of them saw hope. At the doorway, she paused and looked down the stairs. The runway stretched out before her, bright and warm, lined with emergency vehicles and people waiting for answers. It felt like standing at the edge of 2 lives, the one she had abandoned and the one she was stepping into now. The first officer spoke behind her. "Whatever comes next, you don't have to face it alone anymore." She turned slightly, surprised by his sincerity. "Thank you." The officials guided her down the stairs gently, keeping cameras at a distance. Reporters waited, but they were held back for now. The air smelled of jet fuel and sunlight. The world she had avoided for years was now standing right in front of her. At the bottom of the stairs, she stopped and looked around. The sky above, the people waiting, the aircraft behind her that had carried her back into the world. She whispered to herself, not for anyone else to hear, "I'm still here." It was not a declaration. It was not a grand statement. It was simply the truth she had finally accepted. For the first time in 5 years, she felt the ground beneath her feet, not as a place to hide from, but as a place she could belong to again. And as the wind brushed her face, she took her first step into her new beginning.